Hello, and welcome to this Biathlon Integrity Unit podcast on abuse in sport. I'm Callum Murray, and my guest is Joanna Maranhao, a Brazilian Olympian and survivor of sexual abuse. Joanna is also an advocate and researcher and the coordinator of the Athletes Network for Safer Sports. As a professional swimmer, Joanna participated in 4 Olympic Games and won 8 medals at the Pan American Games. After revealing her own history of abuse, she led a campaign to expand Brazil's statutes of limitation to allow survivors of child sexual abuse more time to report and seek justice, succeeding in establishing a new law which bears her name, the Joanna Maranhão Law. So, Joanna, many thanks indeed for joining us for this BIU podcast interview. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. BIU has a very special place in my heart. It was actually my first internship while I was doing my master's was at BIU. So it's just great to be back.
So maybe I could start by asking you to tell us a bit about yourself. You've said I've lived the best and the worst experiences in sport. Maybe we could start with the best experiences in sport for you.
Yeah, so I was a swimmer. I started swimming when I was 3 years old and retired when I was 31. So it was a long ride. It was a long journey. Not just the events that I used to swim. They were like long events, middle distance events. But I really fell in love with the sport, like the hard working, even like the waking up at 4:30 in the morning to jump in the pool at 5 a.m. Sometimes it was not fun, but to me it was like, this is really exactly where I want to be. There was never a doubt that swimming was actually my place, and it still is my place. I don't swim anymore, but I still comment like World Championships and Olympic Games. So it's extremely special. I went to 4 Olympic Games. I was an Olympic finalist. I was able to compete at 4 Pan American Games, which is an event that is really important for us in South America, and earn like 8 medals. So every time I would just like put the Brazilian cap, I never took it for granted. It meant a lot.
So moving on to the worst experiences in sport, you are a survivor of abuse. Could you tell us a bit about your abuse, how it happened and how you have dealt with it?
Yeah, so those abuses that happened when I was very young, I was 9 years old, but back then I already kind of understood that the coaches, they played a huge role into getting me where I wanted to go. So I just like respected the coach. And I think it's really important for me to say that this guy was a bad coach to me, but by no means all of the coaches were bad. I had amazing coaches and like amazing human beings who helped me to get where I wanted to get. But this specific man, he literally used the trust that I had in him and that my family had in him. And I was severely sexually abused. And because I didn't know about my rights, and because it is so hard for a 9-year-old to kind of like understand and verbalize that, I just kept it to myself until it was no longer possible. And as it happens with trauma, when those memories came back, I was already a professional swimmer. I was already an Olympian. And then it came another layer of challenge, which is like, how do I navigate that? How to be an elite swimmer, knowing that I lived the best and the worst experience in the same space? It was very confusing to me to kind of understand, like, how come a couple of weeks ago I was, racing in an Olympic final and having fun, and now I can't even get out of bed. I cannot conceive going to a swimming pool because I feel dirty. I don't want to live with this pain. So navigating that was extremely hard, and still is, because it's with me for the rest of my life. But because I loved swimming so much, and because I knew that I had the right to make peace with the sport, I didn't give up, even though navigating this trauma kind of like hindered me from being more competitive, because there were so many up and downs, but I refused to give up on sport. And I decided that was the most courageous thing that I did in my life, was embrace my vulnerability. Yes, I am a survivor of sexual abuse in sport, and I'm going to stay here.
You were only 9. Did you know you were being abused? Did you know it was wrong? Did you feel it was wrong?
I definitely felt that it was wrong, that it was painful, that I had shame to the extent that I didn't know how to talk to my mom about it. She says, I do not remember that I tried to tell her. I think he tried to kiss me, but what he was doing was a lot more severe, but that was all I could actually verbalize. But I didn't know that that was abuse. I remember thinking to myself while the abuse was happening, and here is a content warning to people who have been impacted by abuse. I know this is hard for them to listen to this, but I remember thinking, does he has the right to do this? Is this something that he's doing because it's going to make me swim faster? Is it because something on my suit? Did I give him the impression that he had the right to do it? So there's a lot of confusion and, blaming myself, and not knowing that it was wrong, yes, but knowing the severity of what he was doing to me, absolutely not.
How long was it before you went to somebody? Who did you go to, and how did you explain what had happened to you?
It's it's a grueling and interesting process because as I was like becoming a teenager and my body was changing, I kind of like thought, well, I don't want to be recognized as a female. So I remember like cutting my hair really short and using my brother's clothes. And to me, that was like, this is safety. If people don't know if I'm a girl or a boy, it means that I'm safe. I also started having a lot of panic attacks for being alone in rooms because those abuses, they escalated from the swimming pool all the way to his house. And I didn't know where those triggers were coming, and also passing out. And passing out is something that I deal until today. When my body is triggered, it just shuts down. It's the way for my body to protect me, to say like, stop, you're pushing too hard, take a step back. So those things were happening, but I couldn't like link to what has happened to me. But it's a process. Those memories, they start to come back. And I started like, my first boyfriend, I kind of like understanding like, okay, so do I like him? Can I trust him? And the relationship with my coach and then with my mom, until I decided to sit down in therapy and say like, I really want to go back to those memories. They're blurry at the moment. I know that this happened. I need to face this. And that was after my first Olympic participation when I was 17, but I only disclosed it publicly to the Brazilian population when I was 21. So it was like a 4-year process.
So who did you tell first?
I try to tell my mom, I try to tell my grandma, but it was literally like, I think he tried to do something with me. Like telling them like I was sexually abused. I actually did that in therapy to say like I am a victim of sexual abuse.
Mm.
And there was also one time back in 2003, so many years before disclosing, that I knocked at my coach's hotel room to say like I cannot sleep because I was alone in a room. And he was like, what has happened to you? And I told him like, I think this is what happened to me when I was a child. I'm not entirely sure, but I cannot sleep. And then I remember him telling me something like, no one is ever going to do that to you. You are safe. And that's when I kind of realized the severeness and the extent. But at that point, I was 16 and I was so focused into, I really want to do well at the next year's Olympic Games. I don't have time to deal with this anymore. So I pushed it back again. So you're like, it's a process when like, okay, so I'm going to disclose until this point. And then, okay, so how am I feeling with all of this? And then you just like start to open the group to the group of people to kind of understand until I was ready in 2008 to disclose it publicly.
So, I mean, it sounds like for a long time you dealt with this alone or tried to deal with this alone. That's obviously not the ideal experience. What would you tell fellow athletes now who are being abused? How would you advise them to deal with it?
Well, there's so much. The first thing is like look for someone that you feel like is going to be there for you because it's a big step. Like telling this story for the first time, it always feels like you're vomiting, that you're putting something out and it's so heavy and it stays in your body, it literally stays in your body. And there's no way to know how your body and you're going to react to it. Some of us kind of like shake, some of us passed out, some of us throw up. It's really hard. It's really grueling, but look for someone that's going to listen to you. You have rights. If you feel like the experience is uncomfortable to you, you have the right to speak up and say something. Given said that, we're still developing measures within the sport ecosystem. And I know that BIU is working really hard to create those safe spaces so we can protect those athletes from further retaliation and further harm. So I always say that speaking up is really important, but we need to be cautious and careful that we can provide services before asking people to disclose.
And what should someone do if they witness or they suspect that somebody they know is being abused?
Whistleblowers and positive bystander behaviors are key for us to dismantle those abusive environments. So whistleblowers, I always say, you have the obligations to step up and say something, even if it's your boss, even if it's someone that holds an authority over you. And then this is a message to sports governing bodies. We need to make sure that we protect survivors, but we need to make sure that we protect the whistleblowers as well. Only by creating systems where we can encourage whistleblowers to disclose when they witness those incidents and protect them from further retaliation, that's the only way that we're going to push this needle and then move forward.
So how can athletes and coaches make sure they stay safe?
This is a really tricky question. There's so much for us to do, right? We need to make sure, like, whenever there's an incident, whenever there's a scandal, and we're able to sanction the perpetrator, it doesn't mean that we have dismantled the violence around that ecosystem. So it's not just about sanctioning the one person, it's about shifting the culture. It's about people understanding that there's a way to make sports and be good at it and have performance in a way that respects the well-being of athletes. By saying this, I'm not saying that you cannot train hard and you're not going to go through physical pain and sacrifices to go all the way to the Olympic level, all the way to an Olympic podium. But we need to make this, making sure that athletes and coaches and everyone are together in this, in a co-creative model. A coaching style that doesn't look for compliance, but look for compassion. And actually research, when I say this to some people, they're like, that's not going to work. That actually works. And science proves that it actually works. There is a way for us to make sure that elite and competitive sports is safe.
You are now an advocate on behalf of athletes who have been abused. Tell us about the organization that you advocate through.
Yeah, happy to. So I work for the Sporting Rights Alliance, and we are this civil society, international coalition of civil society organizations working for human rights in and through sports. In my role at the SRA, I coordinate this international network for people impacted by abuse in sports, and then abuse like psychological, physical, sexual abuse, all types of harms, in a way that we think that if we foster, if we create and strengthen those safe spaces for people impacted, we're able to heal and build momentum to drive to the systemic change. This is an extremely complex topic that sometimes there's a lot of resistance from sports governing bodies and from the survivor community. So how can we make sure that we can collaborate to call upon sports governing bodies whenever they need to be called upon, but at the same time collaborate with them? It's really hard to strike that balance, but while we try to do that from an advocacy lens, we also provide services to those victims and survivors through webinars, through well-being resources, through an emergency fund where survivors apply and we send them money so they can use for psychological aid, for legal aid. So there are there are a lot of actions that we do through that network to make sure that we advance our rights and we make sure that this is part of our healing journey.
Joanna, a really interesting and valuable advice. Thank you very much for joining us on this podcast.
Thank you so much, and best of luck on your endeavors to make sports safe.